Welcome to Early Intervention Matters, the podcast that helps parents, teachers, and health professionals understand the diagnosis, treatment, care, and support of children with autism, ADHD, Tourette's, and other neurodevelopmental challenges. Your host, Dr. Inyang Takon, is a consultant neurodevelopment pediatrician, and she will provide insight through interviews, answering questions, and breaking down complicated topics. By sharing stories from parents and professionals in the field, we hope to make sense of what can be an overwhelming topic. Early intervention is crucial with children with developmental difficulties. Yes, early intervention matters. And now, here's your host, Dr. Inyang Takon.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. You're welcome to Early Intervention Matters podcast. I hope you've all had a good week. Today, we have a very special guest all the way from United States. We're going to be speaking with Daniela and hearing a lot about the great work she's doing in supporting children with one key factor which we know lots of children struggle with, which is reading. I was lucky or fortunate to meet Daniela on a platform which you find guests to speak to and interview. And as you know, I always look for people who can bring light into the difficulties which children I see deal with. So I was really happy when I looked into Daniela's work, and she just fitted all the tick boxes of, somebody who could really break down these challenges for families and shed more light and give more tips. So thank you so much, Daniela, for connecting with us. And if you could introduce yourself to our guests and tell us a bit more about yourself and your work.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm very excited to be talking to you about reading struggles, whether dyslexia or otherwise. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I was actually a lawyer in Washington, D.C. for about 25 years, and then decided that what I really wanted to do was teach dyslexic kids to read. So I took some of those wonderful skills I had developed as a lawyer, and I turned and went back to school, got a master's degree in special ed, and did a bunch of specialized trainings in teaching dyslexic children to read and spell. I absolutely love what I do. We're an organization, it's called Kids Up Reading Tutors, so an organization in the United States that works with kids primarily in the U.S., although we do have a few outside the U.S. now. We are 17 tutors currently working with about 70 students. The kids we work with range in age from what we call first grade all the way through 12th grade. So basically the school years. So we take kids whenever they come to us. In some cases, that means they were diagnosed with dyslexia as early as first grade. In some cases, it means there is no diagnosis, but the parents noticed that there was something going on here with reading and spelling. And in some cases, the children were diagnosed with dyslexia as teenagers. A lot of times that happens as they're heading toward the kind of like college entrance exams that we have here in the U.S. They're called the ACTs and SATs. And in preparation for that, parents sometimes, are worrying about their students, and then they get their children tested by a psychologist. And lo and behold, the explanation for the struggles that they've been having for years and years is dyslexia. And so we have a lot of testing psychologists who refer families to us as well. So our kids range from grade 1 through grade 12. We have the occasional college student, but not very many.
Great. Sounds like you have a very nice framework about how the children come to you, which is really good. One of the things we struggle with here, and which I see in my clinical practice, is lots of children come to see me for neurodevelopmental problems. So they get referred by their physician, their primary care physician. Some children come to see me because I also run a private practice apart from working for the National Health Service. So some parents will self-refer. And one of the key things I explore when I take my developmental history is the educational history. I always find it quite interesting that a lot of the children have had difficulties with reading, which people haven't really recognized that that's the core problem, because what the children have sometimes presented with is kind of anxiety around schoolwork, behavioral challenges. And so the behaviors have been things that people have focused more on. And when you start delving into the educational history, then you start finding that there's almost a fear of, reading and written work. And then parents become worried about, is it the behavior that's causing them not to read? And so it's quite interesting that lots and lots of children, I would say, have these difficulties, and it's a major thing that we have as difficulties for children we see. That was one of the things that made me really pleased to be talking to somebody who knows a lot about this field and helping children. So just going through, what does typical early reading development look like? And when typically do children with dyslexia tend to divert from that path? So what are the early things you find, and what would we say is good or expected reading skills or trajectory? What do parents pick up when that's not happening?
Yeah. It's actually fascinating. It turns out they've done brain scans. They've determined that you can actually, with fairly high likelihood, determine that a child has dyslexia before you ever teach them to read. Like you can do brain scans on a 4-year-old and determine that that child is likely to ultimately have dyslexia when they start learning to read, even though nobody's ever taught them to read yet. Nobody's even started with
Mm,
that process. So it really is a matter of, I'm going to use the layman's terms here and just say, it's how the brain is wired. Does the child really understand that words are made up of individual sounds? And if you string sounds together in different combinations, you get different words. To somebody who's a fluent reader and a good speller, well, yeah, of course, sounds are words and words are sounds, of course. But to somebody whose brain is not wired that way, that is far from obvious.
mm,
And so, one of the earliest signs is, can your child pull apart a word? Like, for example, if you ask your child, you say a word, say ball. Okay, what's the first sound in that word? And can they tell you that that's a B? They don't need to know the name of the letter, but can they tell you that in order to produce this word ball, they are actually producing individual sounds, and the first sound that they are producing is a B? And can they tell you other words they know that start with a B?
mm,
Or can they tell you a bunch of words that they know that end with a, and you can substitute in any letter, any sound that you want. But in order to be able to do that, you have to have a fundamental understanding that a word is made up of individual sounds, as opposed to ball is a word, and bat is a word, and tree is a word, and desk is a word. And if you don't understand that those are composed of individual sounds and that we take those individual sounds and put them together in different combinations to make different words, then you're likely to have more difficulty with learning to read. It's also related to things like rhyming. So,
mm,
to go back to the word ball, can your child tell you fairly early on, can they tell you other words that rhyme with ball?
mm,
Ball, fall, tall, wall, call, and so on. In order to be able to do that, you have to be able to split off that initial B sound, that initial B. So ball is composed of a B at the beginning, and then we call that the onset, and then the rhyme, which is the vowel and everything after it. So all. So B, all. And if you can take ball and separate it out into the onset and the rhyme, and then swap out that onset. So instead of the B in front, you're going to have a K or a F or a H or whatever, call, haul, fall, maul, wall, and so on and so forth. That's how rhyming works. But for a lot of kids, rhyming comes naturally. But there are a lot of children for whom rhyming just doesn't make any sense. Like you ask a child to tell you what rhymes with ball, and they say bat because, bat's
mm,
related. They haven't understood how rhyming works, that you can split that word apart, keep a part of it steady, and swap out a different part of it. So that would be one of the early signs, and that can all be done orally. You don't need the child doesn't need to know how to spell anything, doesn't need to even hold a crayon or hold a writing implement of any sort. If kids are
Mm.
having a lot of trouble with it and they're a little bit older and they've learned the letters and the sounds, it very much helps to bring in the sounds and the letters. But if you're working with a 4-year-old who maybe hasn't learned that yet, you can just start at a completely oral level and
Mm.
really help them develop that understanding that words are sounds and sounds are words. And that's
Exactly.
critical to becoming a fluent reader.
That's really good explanation.
Tuning into what you were saying before about the behavioral issues, we see it a lot. When a new student comes to us, I've talked to the parents up front and I do screeners with a child. And as part of that, we're having a whole conversation. So tell me more. What's going on at home? What's going on in school? And a lot of times there is anxiety involved. Sometimes school refusal or, heading in that direction of school refusal. A lot of times it spills over into math. It spills over into
Yeah.
other subjects at school. It's not just a problem in your English language
Yes.
class. It becomes it might start as a reading problem and a spelling problem and a problem in English class. But if you're asked to read word problems, for example, in your math class, and you can't read those instructions,
Yeah.
you can't read the prompt, well, then what started as a reading problem soon enough is going to become a math problem.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I do see this. Some children will be very good with mental maths, and then families think they're really good with their mental maths. Then it comes into when they now have the worded problem. A lot of them freeze and they're so
Yeah.
anxious. And yeah, and this is something we see.
Yeah. Yeah, and anxiety is a huge part of it as
Yeah.
well because, I mean, imagine you're the child, you're going to school, you're looking around at all these other students who can do this seemingly with ease, and it
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense to you. I mean, that would make me anxious. I completely understand that. And part of the feedback that we get from families as we take students through our program and teach them to read and spell, one of the pieces of feedback we get from families is that, wow, the stress level, the anxiety level in
Yeah.
our house is coming way, way, way down. We're not
Yeah.
having these fights about doing homework after school anymore. I'm not having this discussion with my son about, no, you have to answer the teacher in a complete sentence. You can't just use one word.
Yeah.
So kids become more willing to write a complete sentence, actually write, all those wonderful creative thoughts that they have,
Yeah.
until they're fairly comfortable with spelling, they tend to be very resistant to writing down anything more than the absolute bare minimum because it's just so effortful to spell those words. Well, you know what? Forget the long words. I'm just going to use short words. And forget
Yeah.
those long sentences. I'm just going to use really short ones. I'm just going to do the absolute least amount of writing and spelling that I need to do in order to hand this assignment in. And all of that eases as kids become more confident with reading and spelling. And it's in English class, it's in math class, it's in social studies, science, like it's in everything. So it affects the child across the board at school, at home, just their general confidence levels improve dramatically when suddenly like even before they're reading fluently, when they realize that I actually understand this now. I can learn this. Maybe I haven't learned it all yet, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
capable of learning it. And I think even just that realization is super, super powerful for kids.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they've been struggling for years and years and years and always thought they were just, too stupid. I hear that a lot. Oh, I was just too stupid to learn to read. No, 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 no. And once they start to see that and start to see that it makes sense, and actually, you know what? Here is a finite number of skills that I need to learn, and then
Yeah.
I will, miles ahead of where I am right now. That anxiety, that stress level comes way, way, way down.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that you've outlined that bit because I get referred lots of children with suspected attention deficit. And I'm sure you probably have seen a lot of children where problems have been felt to be due to attention difficulties, whereas actually it is a reading problem and that anxiety that comes in. So they produce very little work or they avoid the work. And sometimes when we've done those assessments and tried to explain to the families that the child is not really meeting the core criteria for attention deficit, but there are definite issues with the learning, the reading, the writing. The parents sometimes do not understand how that relates to the child because the child can appear as if they're not listening or not producing the work because they can't concentrate. But we do see a lot of children with reading problems where we then ask the parents to go and get them tested. And like you said, once a child is achieving and getting the support they need, we see the anxiety levels and that sheer confidence coming in for the child. So it is so important. In fact, I wish it was possible to assess for these difficulties in any child being sent in for, say, ADHD assessment. I always feel that it would be lovely to have that assessment alongside assessing for ADHD because there's a huge proportion of them who still have difficulties even when they get the diagnosis of ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge overlap
Yeah,
between children with ADHD and
yeah,
children with dyslexia.
yeah.
And one thing that I think really, really affects these kids is if you're having such a hard time with reading, that means you're having to expend so much more effort and focus. As you're trying to decode those words, you're actually having to work so much harder than some of those other children in the class for whom reading just comes naturally. So
Mm-hmm.
it might not even be that you have ADHD, that you have
Yeah,
focusing. You might be able to focus just fine, but the demand on your focus is so much greater because you're having this trouble with reading. The kids are overwhelmed. So I agree completely. It would be wonderful if we could check, every time a parent is concerned about ADHD, we'll also check their reading.
yeah.
We also check their math skills, like a more comprehensive evaluation that checks to see if there's something else at play here.
Mm.
We've started most of the states in the United States have passed laws that are requiring schools now to test children for dyslexia in kindergarten and first grade.
Really? Okay.
I don't know that it's implemented in all 50 states yet, but we're at least moving in the right direction.
Mm.
Parents are now in more and more states getting letters home saying, hey, we've tested your child, and this is not an official diagnosis of dyslexia, but here's some warning signs. We're seeing some red flags, and you might want to keep an eye out for this.
That's really interesting. What's the youngest age? I mean, here in the UK, there are times when I've asked parents to speak to school about testing their child, and they've been told the child is too young and that they can't test just yet. So, what's the youngest age that you can do this test?
It's interesting. I don't actually know. I'm not a testing psychologist. I know I've seen lots of kids in first grade who've been tested. So I know it's done in first grade here. I don't recall ever seeing a formal diagnosis of dyslexia for a kindergarten student. So
Mm-hmm.
kindergarten for us is 5 years old. First grade would be 6 year old. So I have not seen a formal diagnosis in the 5 year old crowd.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, we don't usually work with the 5-year-olds, so
Mm,
I'm not saying it can't happen or it doesn't happen. I'm just saying I haven't seen it. That's not the population that we work with very much. We
mm.
do work with some 5-year-olds, primarily who are younger siblings of students that we've worked with or are currently working with. So this, as I'm sure you know, and probably your listeners know, there's a huge familial component to all of this. So if there's one person in a family with dyslexia, there is a very good chance that there are other people in the family with dyslexia. Oftentimes I'll ask the parents who've come to me about their student, I'll say, did either one of you have any trouble with reading or spelling as you were growing up? And maybe any of your siblings, so any of the child, aunts or uncles or grandparents, and most of the time, one of the people I'm talking to, one of the parents will raise their hand and say, "Yep, it was me," or "Yep, my sister,"
Mm.
or "Yep, my brother." And so we actually always have a good number of sibling pairs or sometimes cousin pairs.
Mm,
Because when one family has their child in tutoring with us and sees that it's working and their child is learning to read and spell, that news travels like wildfire within that family. And
mm,
then suddenly we've got, siblings and cousins and, others coming from the same
yeah,
family from other parts of the country.
that's great. So, as a clinician, obviously seeing children in clinic, are there some questions that you feel might be useful for us to, explore with families just to help to pick up these concerns? What would your advice be for clinicians? Because a lot of them are coming through the neurodevelopmental route and referrals.
Sure,
And
sure.
I know that when we take the history, the developmental history, obviously we're looking at a lot of the neurodevelopmental disorders. But in terms of the educational history, when we take that, are there things that would be useful to explore?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have something on our website called the checklist red flags for dyslexia or something like that. So there's a
Okay.
bunch of good questions on there that you might consider, that you might ask. There's, in addition to there being a big overlap between students with dyslexia and students with ADHD, there's also a huge overlap between students with dyslexia and students who have other language issues.
Mm-hmm.
Developmental language disorder, students who have articulation issues, they can't pronounce the R's or the L's, or students who have trouble, instead of saying spaghetti, they will say paschetti. All of those are signs of, again, layman's terms here, I'll just call them glitches in the language system. And as you have some glitches in the language system, you're more likely to have other glitches in the language system. So if your
Mm-hmm.
child is having a hard time pronouncing R's, for example, there's a good chance that they're going to have a harder time learning to read and spell blends with R's. So these things are absolutely connected. Not everybody with dyslexia has an articulation issue, but if your child has an articulation issue, dyslexia is something to be on the lookout for.
Okay.
Let's just put it that way. So another, if you don't mind me, should I just keep going?
Yeah. Yeah. Keep going.
I could talk forever about this stuff.
No, I'm enjoying this. I'm learning a lot.
Another one would be to ask parents, do they feel like their child is memorizing words? Like
Okay.
that's one of the hallmarks of dyslexia, that the child, rather than trying to sound the word out from left to right, this letter is associated with this sound, this letter with this one, and then running it all together. What these kids very often will do, because they don't understand that that's what they're supposed to be doing, they think they're supposed to be memorizing all these words. And so they think they're supposed to memorize this one and this one and this one and this one. And they're looking around the classroom thinking, oh my gosh, everybody else's memory is so much better than mine. I've memorized all these words. But that's what they're desperately trying to do. And so when parents are having conversations with their child and their child's talking about how hard it is to memorize words, that would be something to be on the lookout for. Or if the parents are reading with the child and they're reading the same word over and over and over again and are not remembering it from this sentence to the next sentence, it's like, yes, they sounded that word out, but it didn't stick. Not after the first time, not after the second time, not after the third time. Like we keep having that same word and it's not sticking. And the child needs help with that same word over and over again. That would also be a sign that there's a glitch, that there's something going on. There's a process called orthographic mapping that happens,
Mm-hmm.
which is, imagine you're driving down the street and you pass a big billboard, a big sign by the side of the road. You can't stop yourself from reading that. Whether you want to read that or not, whether you intend to read that or not, you see those letters in those combinations and you read it. It just happens within your brain, no effort required. And that's as the result of a process called orthographic mapping, which is basically that your brain is mapping the letters to the sounds and then the meaning of the word. And once your brain has understood how the system works and then has mapped the sounds and the letters and the meaning, it will stick to your brain and you won't have to sound it out anymore. Once you got it, you got it. And if a child is just not getting, it's not sticking, then that orthographic mapping process probably isn't working very well. And then you need to figure out why. Some kids just need more repetition than others. There might not be any glitch in the system at all. This is just a child who needs 10 repetitions as opposed to another child who needs 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. But there might actually be a glitch in the system and that the orthographic mapping isn't working because they don't really understand how the system works, for example, because they have poor phonological skills, is the terminology we would use. That's usually what it is for the little kids.
Okay. And for our audience, do you want to explain a bit more about the phonological skills? What does that mean?
Sure, absolutely. So, phonological skills are really about, I'm going to say how your brain is wired, but it's really about, do you understand how our reading and writing system works? Do you understand that words are made up of individual sounds? And that if you string sounds together in different combinations, you get different words. If you don't understand that, if your brain isn't wired that way, it's very, very difficult to learn all the phonics patterns that you need to learn in order to become a fluent reader in English. The good news is this can be trained. It's not that, you were born with this brain and, you're stuck with it and there's nothing you can do. If you think of the brain more like a muscle, you can strengthen areas of your brain. You can work on building connections between one part of your brain and another part of your brain. And you can do that in this phonological arena. So there are exercises that you can do to help your child improve or to help build your child's phonological skills. And it starts with early exercises of, can you take a compound word, so a word like baseball? Can your child take a word like baseball and pull it apart into its 2 individual components and then remove one of those? So you might say to your child, okay, say baseball. Now say baseball, but don't say base. And then what's left? And if your child, is 5 or older and you say baseball, but don't say base, and they just give you the big brown eyes and they have no idea what you're talking about, I would say that's a red flag.
Yeah.
And it starts with compound words. You also then, if they can do it with compound words, no problem. You might try it with a 2-syllable word. Say silver. Now say silver, but don't say sill.
Mm.
If they can do that easily with a 2-syllable word, then try it with a 3-syllable word. Say
Okay.
umbrella. Now say umbrella, but don't say
Yeah.
And then, you also want them to be able, I keep giving examples where you're removing the first syllable, but you also want them to be able to remove the last syllable in the word as well. And then we get to the onset rhyme, which we were talking about before, like say ball, but don't say b. They should be able to tell you all.
Mm.
Or say ball, but instead of all, say at. Because then they're having to separate the ball into b and all, and then remove the all and substitute in the at. So they're learning that a word can be pulled apart into smaller and smaller pieces. First, we do it at the syllable level, and then we start breaking a syllable down into smaller and smaller pieces. And then we start removing individual sounds or adding individual sounds or substituting sounds, and then blending it all back together again. And there are a couple great programs here in the US that people like me use to help kids learn these phonological skills.
Okay.
I don't know how widely these are used in the UK or if you guys have different programs that you use in the UK to teach kids phonological skills. I'm not really sure.
Okay. I probably would. It would be the specialist teachers and the dyslexic specialists that would
Yeah.
probably
I would know
know
what programs are being
what
used in the
programs they
UK right now.
use. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
for us, we refer the children, or we ask the way children get assessed at schools here is in the National Health Service. We can't refer directly to the tester, to the psychologist. So we have to ask parents to request that from school directly. But
Okay.
if we were seeing them independently, we can signpost them directly to an educational psychologist who can then do the testing
Okay.
and be able to do that. Thank you so much for clarifying that, because I think this is sometimes parents get this reports and they're told, oh, your child's got some phonological problems, and some parents are at a loss as to what that means. So they don't really understand the details of what that means. So I think it's really helpful to have you explain that to parents and to see how they can practice in building that for the child.
Yeah, and that's actually a wonderful thing to reinforce for parents that they can help their child develop stronger phonological skills.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult, at least here in the US, I think it's difficult for most parents to teach their children the phonics skills that kids need to learn because most adults here in the US don't know all of these different phonics patterns. They didn't learn them themselves, or maybe they learned them so long ago they don't remember them. So I think it would be a tall order to ask a typical parent here in the US to help their child learn the different phonics patterns that you need in English in order to be a good reader and speller. But parents can absolutely help their child develop stronger phonological skills.
Mm.
So there are, like I said, there are a couple of good phonological programs here in the US. I'm sure you have some good ones in the UK as well. It's basically, the one I'm thinking of right now, it's a book and you can go buy the book and it tells you the first half of the book is why, but you don't even have to read that if you don't want to. You can start doing those exercises with your student, and that will help them tremendously.
Yeah. I think just hearing that there are things that families can do,
Absolutely.
it's just a relief because parents sometimes are at a loss about how do I help my child? And I think that's just great that parents can begin to do these practices using everyday things and everyday activities to begin to build that phonological processes with the child.
Yeah.
Do parents sometimes get worried about their child being labeled or having a level of dyslexia? Do you find parents who are worried about that or
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and we have some parents who come to us and have not had their child tested for dyslexia, and
Mm.
the first or second sentence out of their mouth is, "My child does not have dyslexia." And then they proceed to describe a bunch of traits that are very often associated with kids who have dyslexia.
Mm.
But you know what? It doesn't matter. For
Yeah,
our purposes as tutors, as people who teach kids to read who are struggling with reading and spelling, it doesn't matter whether the kids have an official diagnosis of
this is a
dyslexia,
not.
whether they
Yeah.
doesn't even matter whether they do or don't have dyslexia, no matter diagnosis or not. The kids who are having trouble with reading need really good, systematic, explicit instruction in whatever skills they're missing. Usually that's phonological skills and phonics skills. And then you also get into spelling rules and morphology and fluency and other things. But what you really need is you need an assessment up front of some sort. It doesn't have to be a dyslexia assessment, it could be just a reading assessment to try to figure out where those problems are. What skills does your child already have? And what skills are they missing? So
Yeah.
that you can then or yourself or, hire a tutor or whatever you want to do, but you can then focus on those skills that your student is missing. And if we have if we have a first grade student, we would generally, we'll screen them up front, figure out what they know, what they still need to learn, and then we'll
Mm.
start with the kindergarten skills. You need to start with the earliest skills that they're missing. And once they've got
Okay.
the kindergarten skills, then you teach them the first grade skills. And once they've got those down, then you teach them the second grade skills. And we do that same process no matter how old the student is.
Okay.
So even if we have a student coming in who's, a teenager, they're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior in high school, we still go through that same process of doing those initial screeners to figure out, okay, what do they know and what do they still need to learn on the phonics front, on the phonological front. Depending on how that goes, I may also check their spelling skills up front. But usually, if they've got weak phonological skills and a bunch of holes in their knowledge of our phonics patterns, you don't even have to go do a spelling screen.
Very good.
Already know what you're going to find. All right. Because
Yeah.
you don't have those. So you got to start with those earliest skills and then build up from there. That's really super important. I have every once in a while, I talk to a parent who says, "Well, my child's in third grade. And so I want you to teach them the third grade skills." And I'm like, absolutely, we'll get there, but we need to make sure they're solid
From the basics. Yeah.
on the first grade skills. And there are some parents who don't want that. They're like, no,
Yeah.
she's in third grade. I want you to teach her the third grade skills. And, we've suggested to those parents that they go find themselves a different tutor because that's not going to be effective.
Exactly.
We don't do that.
Yeah. And when you were talking about you need to sort the basics out before you go on to the spellings and all that. It just brings up to sometimes parents will come and say he keeps failing his spelling test repeatedly. And, he's done it several times and he fails even when you teach him the words and you think he's learned it, but he's failed. And, in our conversation, and I'm just thinking, yes, this makes a lot of sense because once you haven't sorted out the basics, the phonological aspects and all that, then that child is going to struggle to just come up with the right spellings.
Yeah. And I would say your memory, and anxiety and other things will
Yeah,
also play a role in those spelling tests. Because
yeah,
if a child doesn't understand how the system works and they're learning those spelling words for the spelling test by memorizing them, that's not a solid way to learn to spell in English.
mm,
And it's very much subject to then interference by anxiety, for example. So if you haven't actually learned to spell them, in fact, you've learned to memorize how to spell them, and then you have, test anxiety because you're completely concerned about your scores on this upcoming test, that's going to impact your memory. And that's so, even though it looks like the night before she knew them all, but then on the test, suddenly she didn't know them anymore, there's something else going on there. And it just might be that she didn't actually learn them the traditional way, the way you'd want the child to learn them, but instead she memorized them. And then the memory was impacted by the anxiety or by something else going on.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think this is just a great discussion because as we're talking, I'm thinking about young people whom I've seen and where that has been quite a significant anxiety for the young person, and parents are trying to work out, but you know, what could be going on. And one of the easiest things parents always think is it just attention deficit problems?
right.
But when you've gone through, you can see that there are actually problems with that child's learning of
That's right.
of the basics, and the teachers comment on that as well. And also, it's good to see that you have to go back to resolve that problem. You have to actually get the child to learn the foundations and then build from there. Because if not, they are not going to be able to do it successfully.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that's what we see over and over again with students of all ages.
Yes. So, how long does it take, on average, for a child to go from?
The $1,000,000 question. That's the $1,000,000 question. That's the question every parent asks me. How
Yeah.
long is this going to take? And I'll give you the same answer that I give the parents. I don't know at this point. We need to do usually that question comes up in the very first conversation. And I explain, well, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what does she already know and what does she still need to learn. So first, you need to figure out sort of a size and scope of the problem. Are his phonological skills perfectly intact and he's just missing a dozen phonics patterns? That's going to be quick and easy.
Mm,
But if his phonological skills are very weak, and by the way, we need to go back to kindergarten skills to shore up those kindergarten skills and then build up from there, that's
mm,
going to be a much larger problem. So first we have to figure out, is this, a small problem, a medium-sized problem, or a large problem? And then, of course, there are lots of other questions like, well, how quickly is he or she going to pick it up? Because so we have in our program, we have everything divided up into different skills. And on average, most of our students will learn one of those skills per 45-minute lesson. But I've worked with kids who've learned 4 skills in 1 lesson, and I've worked
mm.
with kids who needed 4 lessons to learn 1 skill. So
So it all depends on the.
how quickly are they gonna pick it up? And, oh, by the way, how often are you doing the tutoring?
Okay.
Because if you're just doing tutoring once a week, it's basically a waste of your time and money. You're not gonna
So
see.
what do you recommend in terms of?
So, again, it depends on, well, how many skills is she missing? Is he missing? How quickly do you want him to get caught up? For some kids, you know what? This is not a big deal. It's not affecting his self-confidence. He's a happy-go-lucky kid. Doesn't matter really how long it takes. We only wanna do this twice a week, and he'll get caught up.
Mm,
It's caught up. And that's totally fine. But other parents come to us and say, this is a major problem. It is affecting her self-confidence. It's causing anxiety. She doesn't want to go to school, on and on. And then you're going to want to do more sessions per week to get caught up more quickly.
Mm.
And there's a certain number of skills that the child has to learn. And if you're doing sessions 4 times a week, they're obviously going to learn all those skills much more quickly than if they're only doing tutoring sessions twice a week.
Yeah.
So parents have a huge influence on how long this whole process is going to take. But
Mm.
to your original question, how long does it take on average? Most of our students get caught up in somewhere between 4 and 9 months.
Okay.
But most of our students are doing it 3 times a week or even 4 times a week. And then in the summers, it's often 5 times a week because a lot of times parents will want their child to get caught up by the start of the new school year.
Mm.
And so then we'll put a lot of time and effort into working with that student over the summer with the goal
Mm.
of getting them caught up at the beginning of the school year. And for those kids, that generally means 5 days a week for an hour a day.
Okay.
But most families can't do that during the school year. That's too much. So we do tutoring sessions either 45 minutes or an hour, and then we'll do it anywhere between 2 and 5 times a week.
Okay.
The student, their schedule, everything else that's going on. But like I said, once a week isn't going to they're not
Make it a mess.
progress at once a week for it to really be worth it.
And it's actually good to do it, consistently so
Yeah,
that the child then benefits
absolutely.
from it.
Yeah. And if you're doing 2 or 3 sessions, it's good if you can spread them out during the week. Because if
Okay.
you're doing sessions, Mondays and Tuesdays, let's say, then the student has to remember all of the material from Tuesday to the following Monday. So
Mm.
it's better if you can do the sessions, Tuesdays and Fridays or Mondays and Thursdays or something like that and try to spread it out more so that they're not having to remember the material from one session to the next. So that it's easier for them to remember the material from one session to the next so that we have to do less, repetition and reinforcement
Repetition.
in the tutoring sessions and can spend more time focusing on new material as opposed to reviewing material we've already worked through.
Okay. And are there types of assistive technology in these technology days?
Mhm.
Lots of people look for tech audiobooks and the
Sure. Yeah.
text-to-speech. And are there?
Audiobooks are a wonderful, wonderful thing. Audiobooks, if you're having your child listen to an audiobook, they're getting
Yeah.
almost all of the benefits of reading. They're learning about our language, they're learning about our grammar, they're learning about our sentence structure, they're learning
Mm.
vocabulary, they're learning about the world around them. They
Mm.
have, things that they can talk to their friends about. Audiobooks are a wonderful, wonderful thing, and we encourage all of our families to have their students listening to audiobooks while they're in tutoring with us to also work on those decoding skills so that the child can learn to read it with their eyes instead of reading with your ears. But for children who are not yet at a place where they can read with their eyes the kind of material that is age and grade level appropriate, absolutely, audiobooks are awesome. Even for kids who can, do the eye reading as opposed to the ear reading, audiobooks are still a wonderful, wonderful thing. So everybody should be listening to audiobooks. I think that's that given. In terms of other technology, I keep waiting. I keep thinking that there's going to be one of these days I'm going to wake up and there's going to be some awesome software out there to teach dyslexic kids to read. And I've looked at lots of different software and I haven't found anything great yet,
Mm.
but it's happening. It's going to happen. It will exist at some point. It just
Mm.
doesn't yet exist that I know of. Maybe it's out there and I just haven't seen it yet. That's totally possible. But because there are millions, millions and millions and millions of kids who need this kind of help. And there's only a small
Yeah.
fraction of them who can do tutoring with a group like ours.
Yeah.
And so we need something for everyone to benefit from who needs help with reading and spelling. We need something better than just one-on-one tutoring. That is the gold standard. That is the best thing you can do for your child right now. But hopefully someday there will be technology for families that can't make that happen in situations where
Yeah.
that just can't happen for one of many, many reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, there is software out there, text to speech and speech to text. So you can
Yeah.
dictate and it will write for you. Or, you can go to a website and you can have the technology read that to you. But I think those things are just sort of patches over. They're sort of patching over the problem, and I think kids still need to be able to read
To
with
read.
eyes independently. So those things will help, but I do still think that people should be trying to make sure that all kids learn to do this on their own without the help of the technology.
I think it's good because just getting those basics, isn't it, is those basic skills, and you find that once children identify that, they're generally usually happy. It's almost like a new world for
Yeah.
them. They
Yeah,
want to explore, they want to be part of it. And it's a way of building social skills as
absolutely.
well.
Yeah. Some of the best emails I get are from parents who say, "Oh my gosh, look what you've done. My son is now walking around the house and walking outside of the house with a book in front of him, reading a book. He's having so much fun, and now
Mm.
he's, in danger of hurting himself." Or the emails from the mom who's like, I caught her reading under the covers with a flashlight last night for the first
It
time."
must be so rewarding, isn't
Yay!
it? Yeah.
And then the mom has to pretend to be upset because she caught her child reading when she was supposed to. And in the meantime,
When
she's
that's
sending
what
me
she's
these
been
emails.
waiting for all the while.
Yeah. 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 So it's transformative. This
Yeah,
kind of tutoring and going from not being able to read and spell to being able to read and spell is absolutely
it is.
transformative.
Yeah. And the well-being of the child as well.
Absolutely. The younger
Great.
kids, the 1st and 2nd graders, they don't even always notice what's going on. If you ask them a few months into the have you learned a lot? Do you feel like, well, say, no, 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 I knew all this stuff all along. It's all easy, all good.
Mm.
But the older students, the ones who in the US are in high school, those are the ones who've been struggling for years and years and years. When they do this tutoring and they are now learning to become good readers and spellers, they will go to their parents. And they go to their parents and say, "This is life changing."
Yeah.
And the parents will then turn around and email us and say, "You wouldn't believe what my son just said to me." I mean, we get the most amazing emails. We get the most
That's just
amazing.
wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, it
And
really
I
is.
think one key thing that you have mentioned, especially for those who are in the older years and haven't had this success before, and this is for our audience, that it is important that that child goes back and learns the basics from the beginning,
Yeah,
because it's better they get that grounding rather than, people trying to look at the shortcut
yeah,
way of doing it.
yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah, and then I would say the other really important message for parents of older students is that it's never too late. It is never too late. Yes, it would be great if your child had overcome these difficulties in 1st grade or in 2nd grade, but that's okay. They might be
Yeah.
in 10th or 11th or in 12th grade now. They can still learn to become fluent readers and good spellers. And that I think is a really important message to get out there because I think a lot of parents worry that they missed their boat. I should have done this years and years and
Yeah.
years ago, and now there's nothing we can do. And that's not true. It's not
Yeah.
true. There's absolutely still so much you can do.
Fantastic. That's a great message of hope. And if you could change one thing about how we teach reading in the early years, I think you've mentioned it along the way, but for families listening to this where they've got very young children and just beginning, what is one message that you would want to give to them?
I don't know how things are working in the UK, but in the US, the schools and families are not focusing enough on phonological skills. It is really important for kids to develop those phonological skills, and there are easy ways to do it. If you've got a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, be reading nursery rhymes with them. Nursery rhymes or anything that has that kind of rhyming. So in the US, we have Mother Goose nursery rhymes. I'm not sure if that's a thing in the UK. We have Dr. Seuss books
Yeah,
that
that's
also have a lot of rhyming. Those things are awesome for helping kids develop those phonological skills. So if you've got a little one who wants to read the same Dr. Seuss book over and over and over again, do it. Absolutely do it. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's helping them develop their phonological skills.
I'm sure lots of parents will be saying, so I have to keep listening to that Dr. Seuss book again. Great. And as we end, it would be good to hear more about your tutoring service, Kids Up Reading Tutors. Can you talk about a bit more about it for our audience
Sure.
and those who want to connect with you, for families out there who have listened to this and would really want to connect with you, how do you support children and how can they connect with you?
Yeah. So the easiest way to learn more about what we do and to connect with us is to go to our website, and it's kidsupreadingtutors.com. And there's a button on there. There are lots of buttons on there that say book a call or schedule a call. And if you click on that button, you will end up on my calendar, and you can make an appointment and we can talk about your student. And so basically, like I said before, what we do as part of the intake process is we talk to the family. And then we'll do assessments on the student to try to figure out what's going on. And then we will, assuming that we think we're a good match and can help the student, then we'll match the student with one of our tutors. And they then do tutoring 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, depending on the results of the screeners and the conversation with the family, and all that. The one thing we haven't talked about yet is that the fact that it's an Orton Gillingham based program. I'm not sure how well known Orton Gillingham is in the UK. In the US, that's a really big deal. It is a way of teaching kids phonics patterns primarily, but also fluency and spelling rules and morphology and many of those things that go into becoming a fluent reader. So our program is designed to be done online. Almost all of our students are working online with their tutor, and we have a strong phonological component, and then we have this Orton Gillingham based program for phonics, spelling, phonological skill. Morphology, and so on and so forth.
Great. And we will also include the links and how people can connect you. We will include that. So great. And I think one of the other things that we felt would be useful or interesting to know is what barriers do you see in families? Obviously, we've got diverse group of children when in schools or from different backgrounds. You find out that some children from different backgrounds take up the programs more. Is there resistance from some people taking on the programs? And are there ways in which you aim to break through those barriers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit hard for me to answer because when people reach out to us, they've already realized that their student is having an issue
Really? Yeah.
and they want help. So I'm not sure we have sort of the barriers quite like you're describing, but there
Yeah.
are absolutely, special factors to consider when you're working with a student from another language, from another culture. Because we're in the United States, we have a lot of Spanish speakers in this
Oh,
country, and there are differences between English and Spanish that tend to affect the kids we work with. So, for example, in English, we've got the short vowel sounds, and in Spanish, they also have short vowel sounds, but they don't have quite as many vowel sounds as we do in English. And so the kids who are native Spanish speakers, for whom English might be a second language or maybe even a first language, but the language spoken at home is Spanish, they will very often, for example, have trouble distinguishing between a short E and a short I. Because in
okay.
Spanish, you don't have those two sounds as two separate sounds.
Okay.
And then so there are certain patterns, there are certain things that we see in kids from particular backgrounds. And so to be on the lookout for those. And we do our best to match students with tutors who have a similar linguistic background. So we have a fair number of tutors who are native bilingual Spanish English speakers. We have a tutor who speaks Russian, and so we have a few Russian kids that she works with. We have tutors like I speak German, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. If the tutor has even just a bit of knowledge, and has just learned even the basics of another language, it will be easier for them to recognize those kinds of issues
Yeah.
and to be able to say to the child, "Oh, I know why you're pronouncing that way. It's because that's how you would pronounce it in the other language you speak at home, but
Yeah.
in English, we actually pronounce it this way." And even sort of helping the child in that way draw this distinction between, okay, this is what's happening in this language and this is what's happening in that language will help them sort of sort out these issues. And the other good thing is that even though we do all of our instruction in English, we've heard from many, many families that, well, you taught her to read in English, but she's reading much better in Spanish now as well.
Mm,
So the phonological piece in particular carries over into
carries on.
other
Yeah.
languages that the kids might be speaking.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniela. It's been an amazing session.
It's been great.
It's been really amazing. I've learned a lot from the session, being able to understand the basics, the building blocks, and just removing those barriers that parents usually have and those anxieties. Because saying that your child struggles with reading and the emotional components and the fears and worries sometimes makes them so worried, and they begin to think, is this ever going to happen? And I think one of the reassuring things that you've said to us today in the audience is it's never too late.
That's right.
So for families of older teenagers who have been struggling with reading, and there is hope, it's never too late to start, and please seek help.
Absolutely.
And we're so grateful. Daniela has provided her links for us, which we will put in the session when it's being published. And we would like you to connect with her. And the great thing is that the program is online, so, which is great. So people from all over can access this program, which
That's
is
right.
great.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. For me as a clinician, it's been great, even for asking questions on a day to day when I see the children. It's just helped me in that, when families say, oh, they're struggling to read, just expanding a bit more and picking up red flags. And so we do have lots of clinicians, pediatricians who listen to this podcast as well. I'm sure they will benefit from it as well. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us today. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having me on the show.
Thank you.
As we always say, early intervention leads to better outcome, and early intervention can only be achieved by early diagnosis. So thank you for listening into the series today. I know some of the things we've talked about today would probably have generated some questions or need to seek clarification. So I'm happy to take questions, and I'll invite you to send your questions to eim@drtakon.com. Thank you for listening in.